All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. I know we are all excited to hear from the amazing Nafeesah Muhammad, but before we get going, I just want to do a quick introduction of the Advancing Equity Coalition. So my name is Kenneth Abon, and I'm the Executive Director of the Advancing Equity Coalition. I'm so excited to have you all here tonight. And yeah, we're so excited for this conversation. So for those of you who do not know, you're new, the Advancing Equity Coalition is an organization whose mission is to develop the political will and to eliminate institutional racism in Minneapolis public schools. Our organizational values are racial equity, accountability through relationships, cross-racial organizing, data and stories, and raising consciousness on broken conditions. And we want to do all of this work really in service to achieve a vision of every child in Minneapolis public schools receiving a high quality education. The issues that we mainly focus on as a coalition really focus on 5 different things: resource and opportunity hoarding in white wealthy communities, irrelevant curriculum and instruction, race neutral policies and practices, lack of accountability structures, and devaluing BIPOC communities and their cultures. And so our coalition really strives to be representative of both the racial and ethnic diversity of Minneapolis, as well as the geographic diversity of Minneapolis. And so our coalition of organizational partners also really tries to bring to the table perspectives of parents, community members, community leaders, educators, students, and we're continuing to grow. And so, we're excited about any additional partners that want to be a part of our coalition. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time this evening to join us. I know that everyone has a lot going on, but before we get started, I wanted to just take a moment to acknowledge the events that took place today in Richfield and the tragedy that took place in Richfield. Just a few months ago, we organized a panel with principals to talk about how can the school district, the city, the county, and our state really pull together to make our schools and our communities safe for young people. And so our collective hearts break for what happened today in Richfield, and dreaming of a better future. So, with that, I wanted to just take a moment of silence to acknowledge the young person's life that was lost and the community in Richfield and all around us that are grieving today. All right. So thank you. So tonight we are so excited to host this conversation with Nafeesah to discuss all things Minneapolis public schools. Since the new year, MPS has had significant staff absences related to COVID. They have transitioned to and from online learning. They finished their second quarter, and 2 of their unions announced that they would be taking steps towards a strike. As my colleague Heather posted today on Facebook, January has been a long year. So we thought, how do we make sense of this moment in the broader context of everything going on around us? And we couldn't think of a better person to discuss this than with Nafeesah Muhammad. So to introduce Nafeesah, Nafeesah is an 8th year high school English teacher currently at Patrick Henry High School and serves as their English department chair and building leadership facilitator. Before transitioning to Henry in the 2019-2020 school year, Nafeesah cherished her first 5 years in MPS at North High. During her time in MPS, Nafeesah has served on several committees and working groups to better serve the students of Minneapolis public schools. She has also led district-wide professional development for English and language arts teachers, social studies teachers, and special education teachers. She's a proud and active member of the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers, including leading the MFT CDD task force and helped to organize healing circles for BIPOC, MFT, and ESP members. In addition to being a teacher, Nafeesah is also a parent of a current 1st and 7th grader in Minneapolis Public Schools. I mean, on a personal note, I had the fortune of first meeting Nafeesah a few years ago when I was working with young people and trying to elevate young people's voices in the conversation around the CDD. And so Nafeesah and I had the opportunity to partner together to really support some students in a project to have their voices and the voices of their fellow students really elevated. And I got to see Nafeesah in action on a regular basis. And she was so gracious to let me in her classroom, learn from her, and then really invite me to participate and support young people. So I will always, always, always value that and cherish that. So without further ado, Nafeesah, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, so excited to have you. So I know I just gave a very high level and hopefully comprehensive bio of you, but is there anything else that you think folks should know about you as we get started tonight?
Yes, also that I love my community, Black community, diaspora as a whole. I'm so happy, Black History Month, but Black History is every day. But also, you know, yes, I do a lot of work, activism, leadership in Minneapolis public schools, but I also just believe in community partnership in order to get the job done. So I also work closely with the Racial Justice Network. I volunteer on their education committee. In addition to and in partnership with We Win Institute as well. So I do a lot of education advocacy on behalf of the community too, because we're nothing without them.
Ain't that the truth? So the hashtag for tonight is Bring the Fire to MPS. So let's start this fireside chat. And so the way that we're going to do this tonight is we have a couple of questions that we shared with Nafeesah ahead of time to just think about and discuss, just, you know, and reflect what's going on in MPS. But we will make sure to save some additional time at the end for questions from the audience. So please, please, please send questions in the chat, use the Q&A function, whatever. We'll check both and make sure we get some of the best questions up there for you. And so with that, let's start with the first question. You know, I talked again about your bio, Nafeesah, and you know, you've been in MPS for 8 years now. You've been in the North Side your whole career in MPS. But how did you end up in MPS originally, and how would you describe your experience as an educator up until this point in MPS?
Yes. Well, I would say being a teacher is my dream job. You know, it really educationally, I have a psychology degree, undergrad in psychology and a master's in education, but all of it was centered around studying, writing papers, trying to figure out like, what is a quality education really for Black urban youth, you know? And so I moved here 10 years ago, 11 years ago, it's been a while now. And when I moved here, I heard on KMOJ that they were going to close North High School. They were trying to close North High School. And in my understanding, I'm like, oh, that's a beacon in the community. If they want to close it, I understand, you know, because there's a lot of power there. And so I was like, once I entered my master's program, my goal was to teach at North High School. And so once I got my license, I applied for North High School. And I taught there for 5 years. You know, originally when I say like teaching was my dream job, it was teaching children, right? It was teaching the youth and being a partner with them. But once I became a teacher, I also became like a teacher of teachers too. You know, if it was what I studied prior to becoming a teacher or just my understanding of the community, I just stepped forward as a leader because, well, I wanted to leave, to be honest. I wanted to leave North High School. I experienced a lot of white backlash around the equity work. Me and 2 other beautiful Black educators, Courtney Bell and Edira McAllister, were just three musketeering it really with equity and building relationships. And we experienced a lot of white backlash, and we found no support anywhere for almost feeling like we're doing the job that we signed up to do. And so that resulted in my really good friend Idira quitting and then being on administrative leave her last day. Again, eventually Courtney Bell left and went back to school to get her PhD. So I've seen the process of pushing out effective, amazing Black educators to where, I was like the last woman standing, and I was trying to leave too, to be honest with you, but I did not find a job anywhere else. And so I had to make the decision. It was like, if I'm going to stay here, I'm going to be a leader, but I'm also going to be a light. Right. So in order for me to combat the ugliness, the things, the lack of support, the lack of validation in our experiences, and I was just going to say, well, I'm going to be the one then to try to bring an alternate approach to really collectivizing our voices and professionalizing ourselves. And so I became an equity lead. I became the STEM lead. I became onboarding lead. And in that leadership, I found more educators who wanted to be on this mission with me for culture responsive teaching, trauma-informed teaching, bringing community into the school as well. And so that's just what I've been doing since I've decided to stay, is that wherever I go, I'm just going to try to make it better for myself, for community, for parents, for other educators. So I want to be a light and a leader, not just a leader.
Yeah. So would you say that in your time at MPS, you felt like, it sounds like you definitely went through some challenges at North and as that was happening, but what are the ways, I think we've talked about this a lot in the community generally, but just wanting to hear your reflections, how challenging is it to be a light and a leader in your community, right? And like, what are the obstacles to being a light in a community and a leader in your community?
Well, I tell the Racial Justice Network and We Win Institute that I'm so grateful. And Masjid al-Islam, Al-Noor in North Minneapolis as well. Like, my community involvement fills my cup because those are the places that I feel safe. Those are the places I feel seen. Those are the places I feel supported. Now, when I go into school, I feel seen, safe, supported in very minimum places. So I hide out in my classroom. I hang out with the kids. It's like, well, this is what I'm here for. What are the kids? And so there's almost like a disconnect too that you create as a way to protect yourself from the outside school community, unless I'm in a leadership role where I have impact, right? So I have impact around that, but really very hard and hurtful experiences, I would say, where oftentimes I'm on the defense. I have my guards up, and then I'm in my classroom with the kids, and I'm like, oh, finally, I'm with y'all. Yeah. So it is very difficult, but I will say that we are attracted to the light. Okay, if your only option is just one approach, one form of leadership, you start to think that is what's normal. This is how it has to be. And so when I present a different alternative that looks like you're safe, that looks like we're going to validate your reality, especially for educators of color and students too. White teachers who I feel like that have been bullied, like where we feel like the only way we can function is if we silence and exclude voices. I'm like, okay, well, those who have been excluded, come on in, and right. They appreciate that. I would say that I have felt a lot of gratitude from other folks who would appreciate a more empathetic and compassionate accountability too. It doesn't have to feel ugly. It could feel compassionate, but you're still held to your behavior and how you're showing up at the same time.
That's really real. And I think what I've heard in, the work that we do in community is that it's not just educators that feel that way, right? And it's parents that feel that way. It's students that feel that way. So, going back and kind of pointing back at your experience, both as an educator and as a parent, What has the last 2 years been like in teaching and parenting in a pandemic in MPS?
I always say, like, when the dominant discourse is like ringing the alarms for crises, you know, multiply that times 2 for people of color, especially Black folks, you know, like multiply that times 2, because yes, like distance learning was hard, figuring out, navigating that loud. I'm an educator, so I'm literally on the computer screen while my son is over there trying to do kindergarten on the computer screen. And my poor baby girl, who is a social butterfly and needs to be around her friends at the same time, you know, so navigating that, which is the, like, I feel like a lot of the overall human experience. But in addition to that, I'm also mitigating children who are navigating, children and families who need help navigating technology. Parents who don't feel confident. Maybe they didn't, you know, get what they needed to get out of the educational system. And so they're feeling like, how am I supposed to help my kids? So I'm gonna be a resource to them too. I'm gonna figure that out. And so it's like you're also mitigating the issues that arise, but also in particular for our community, people of color, like we have other issues, working class family issues where they still don't have the privilege to go to work, to stay home. So then what about my teenagers in particular who are then acting as parents, or are a parent, acting as teachers to their younger siblings as well, and navigating those things too. And so to me, it was just a bunch of juggling, trying to mitigate harm and be as helpful as possible. So it was just, for me, it was just like, when am I off?
Yeah.
I'm never off. I'm always on, you know? To where you just have to be almost intentional about that. And then you have to feel the guilt, right? Of turning that off, of denying access, of not communicating as well, because you have to take care of yourself, too. So right. It's just a whole bunch of emotions.
I can imagine. But you know, what's interesting to me, what you just shared, is that, you know, a lot of what you talked about in terms of like what's going on in the pandemic, you didn't share were only pandemic related, right? Like there are lots of things that families and students and teachers are going through that aren't just as a result of the pandemic. And so, you know, what were the crises before the pandemic, and what do you see as possible crises coming, you know, as hopefully we see an end to this pandemic, but as we continue on in the future?
Oh my God. Right. That's another talk.
We can do more. We should do more.
It's the things that I was advocating before the pandemic. One would be the digital divide. We see segregation as like a physical thing, you know, where we can see where, you know, redlining has happened and all that. But there's a digital divide in cyberspace that we can't see, where those who have access to internet, access to devices, often navigate online platforms, can hire tutors to help them figure out how to navigate, get coding in their classrooms, right? All those things that are more affluent white folks get, we don't get. And so when we went to distance learning, it's like the kids don't know how to navigate the technology. Teachers don't know what it's like. Well, because we should have been, it shouldn't take a crisis for us to finally get what it is we deserved in the first place. Culturally responsive teaching. Oh, I can't get materials to the kids. Use what they have at home. Yeah. Use their lived experiences. Oh, light bulb, right? So movement, we got to get them moving. Like all these things that, mutual aid, making sure the kids can feed, can eat. I could go on and on, right? All these things that attribute to a quality learning experience, or attribute to it, we did not have. Right. And then when we went to distance learning, we were in reactionary mode of trying to figure these things out, when our teachers should have had professional development around flipped learning and blended learning classrooms. My kids, they was already on Google Classroom, my students. So it was just really like, oh, we on Google Classroom now, y'all.
Yeah.
But for the other folks where their administration didn't make that a priority to make sure students have technology in their classroom, one-to-one, they're using it and as an educational tool, as a means of differentiation, those kind of things, we just should have been doing. And so professional distance, don't care too much, just care enough to do the job. But then when we needed to care to do the job, now it's like, oh, get their numbers, make sure you're in contact with the parents, all those things that we should have been doing, right? All of a sudden became priority. And I just don't think it should have waited to a pandemic for that to happen.
Yeah, and so, I think what I've heard, and not to just like continue to belabor this point, but what I've heard a lot of people like talking about, suggesting is like, this idea, especially around MFT talking about the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers talking about safe and stable schools, right? Just like that has taken on maybe a new or an additional definition in light of the pandemic, right? Or maybe an additional focus, maybe not a different definition, but an additional focus. But what I've also heard on the flip side, because we've done a lot of work in that, working and trying to support people in building, especially BIPOC staff, trying to support and building, different spaces for folks, is like, is there an expansion, or do we need to maybe redefine what safe and stable schools means? Because it might mean one thing to, the majority of our educators, the majority of our district, but it might mean something else to, maybe a smaller group of them. I'm not sure. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on just like how you were perceiving the definition of safe and stable schools?
Well, there's no might, right?
Okay.
We do define safety, differently depending on the context, really. But then it also makes me ask, like, what are you scared of, right? Where's the fear? Where's the harm happening? So if I have felt safe, and many educators of color have felt safe in our school buildings when it comes to colleague to colleague, administrator to colleague to student. Oftentimes we don't talk about like the mental health. We'll advocate for counselors, but we don't talk about like what a safe learning environment actually looks like, that is conducive to learning and conducive to teaching. And so microaggressions, right? We don't even have to call micro aggressions.
It's aggressions.
Right.
Yeah.
When you get an aggression in the beginning of a staff meeting, right? Or you're silenced, or there's racially detouring while you're trying to share your experiences, and then you have to go into the classroom and you hear students experiencing some of those same things. Yeah. It's triggering your trauma and your pain, but then you almost have to set aside your humanity to take care of the little ones, right? It's like, I don't even know how to show up hurt here because I see your pain too. So then I shove that to the side and don't acknowledge that pain. And then I'm getting observed, right? Yep. And I don't trust my administrator. I'm a first year, second year teacher, and I don't have the support, especially if you're a teacher of color. You don't have the support that you need to actually even do the job. Yeah. And then you're thrown in there. But your colleagues have been there for a while, because we know some of the most veteran teachers are white. You may not find that a safe place to get the support, right? Your par mentor, which is a mentor that you get the first year, might be white, probably white. Do I feel safe enough to even be vulnerable to say, this is where I'm struggling at, right? And if there is a grievance where I feel like there's some kind of racialized harassment done to me, who's going to defend me? Who's going to validate that? So then you go throughout your teaching experience feeling very insecure in the classroom, not feeling like you belong. But then you're going outside, right? And your community's like, you're brilliant, you're great, you're wonderful, we love you. Other school districts are saying, we value you, your leadership. So then you're going to move around to where you feel safe at, And so we lose educators of color. right? We're losing families of color, Black families, especially in Minneapolis public schools. And so fight or flight is real. So if people are running away, what is it that they're fighting that is making them feel unsafe in the first place? Is the first question we should be asking, but we don't ask those kind of questions. We do like committees, so.
Look, it's the Minnesota way. Let's committee our way to a solution.
Right, so we never deal with the harm. We never
Right.
deal with the harm. That's the point, is that we have to, we are forced to then endure the harm and stick around for goodness sake, for the sake of our community.
Yeah. So how do we deal with the harm? Like, what's the process to dealing with the harm?
Well, I would say, mental health services, but our medical is crazy, even as educators, right? But I think the way to deal with the harm is love, is healing, and when you feel loved and you feel seen and you feel supported and you're able to be vulnerable and get your reality validated,
Yeah.
and then also have folks who will stand behind you and continue to validate your experiences and your feelings, you start to feel empowered. You start to feel like I can stick up for myself. You start to feel like, oh, there's other people who feel the same way I do. Well, maybe we can do something about it.
Yeah.
But when you're forced, really a lot of times, to suffer in silence because we're so few in numbers, right? Or we have a fragile culture in our schools where even identifying harm puts you in the aggressor's position, right? Where you're gaslighted constantly, then you're never given the chance to take a break, to rest, to repair. But the more folks, that was the beauty of me working at North High School with my sister queens, there were other Black women, Crystal Flint, Tamiko French, right? Joetta Wright. We had all these beautiful Black women at North High School. So when I was feeling like I'm going crazy, they were there to be like, no, sis, remember, me too, girl. Both of us need to go talk to this teacher, right? Culturally responsive SEL support that kept us. But then when you're alone and you don't feel like anybody is validating your experiences, you feel like you're crazy, and therefore you're never able to repair the harm.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking. Again, going back to this idea that you shared earlier around like wanting to be a leader and a light. How can you be a leader and a light while you're also dealing with all of that in isolation by yourself? That's challenging.
And overworked and overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed.
When they find out that you are a leader, what they do is then say, oh, you can lead this, you can lead that. And there's so few of us.
Well, that's why my bio for you is like half a page long.
I know. It's like,
how
I'll
many
just
things
give you
can I
my
keep listing
resume.
here?
Yeah, I know, because it's like, oh, that's a table I can be at. Oh, that's a table I can be at, because there's so few opportunities for us to share our voice. I'm like, well, I don't have the time. I'm tired. But if I don't show up, there's going to be somebody else speaking for us.
Right.
Where they'll never get this perspective. So they'll overwhelm us with the work as well until we're exhausted and burnt out and we can't take it anymore.
Well, speaking a little bit about the small numbers of teachers of color that we have in the district, AEC has been working on this issue. The Advancing Equity Coalition has been working on this issue, trying to really help people understand that there is actually right now a small window of opportunity to ensure that teachers of color are protected from layoffs, right? And so we know that MPS and MFT have been in contract negotiations since February of 2021, so almost a year now. And one of the topics of discussion has been protecting teachers of color for both sides, but an agreement has not been reached yet. And if it doesn't happen in the next 4 weeks, a significant number of teachers of color could be accessed and laid off from the district this year, right? And so what are your thoughts about these ongoing negotiations? I've traded some texts with you that have been pretty fire. But I'd love to just hear your thoughts where you are at right now, because it's been a while since we've actually talked about this. So yeah, where are you at right now with ongoing negotiations, specifically with this topic, but also if you want to branch out into some of the other things that they're talking about in negotiations, would love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Absolutely. I think, so I just gave you like the rundown of, how challenging it could be. as a teacher of color. So there, even if we don't get access, we're just quitting too, right? A lot of teachers are quitting, but in particular, teachers of color, and so, the MOA, whether it's a district or the union holding the MOA up, one, my issue is that it should be contract language meaning it's there forever, right? Until you negotiate to take it out, whereas the MOA, a memorandum of agreement, is just a 2-year agreement that will sunset, and then you're going to have to negotiate over it again. And if you don't, depending on who the leadership is and who's on the negotiating team, then the MOA can just cease to exist.
Right.
That's one of my issues, is that it should be contract language. I'll say that loud and proud.
But my counterpoint to that, I agree that it should be. So it's not a but, it's an and.
Okay.
And it should also be an MOA. Like, we should also get the MOA done while we focus on building the contract language. Like, we can't use creating the contract language as the excuse as to why we don't have an agreement by the end of February, because like, we need this agreement by the end of February. Otherwise, teachers of color are going to lose their jobs in MPS. Like, that's just a fact. So it's a both and in my book.
It is. Well, I mean, we can't add or change anything right now anyway, because we are in mediation. And what that means is that we're no longer negotiating in public, which we were up until October. And then now we are behind closed doors. So we couldn't change anything if we wanted to. So no, it's not. Right. We just need it signed. And even if, because everybody's like, they're making this argument, like there's a teacher shortage. How can we be laying off teachers of color and all that? Even if they're not accessed, even if they're, even if there are positions open, it doesn't mean then that they get to stay where they're at. That just means also too that they can move around. And so the MOA would also protect them too for like the school that they're, so like Lucy Laney has a beautiful, there always can be more, but they have a great number of educators of color who are working there, in Charisma, who's a parent at Laney and also a family engagement at the district. I was there with them trying to fight to save the educators of color, and the principal trying to save the Black teachers and educators at that school. And that's stress too. You know what I'm saying? Right. It's like, why do we gotta keep fighting for access to our community to stay there? To me, that's mind-blowing just in general, that the teachers who decided to be teachers and teach in the places where they feel like they can serve their community, they got to beg and plead just to stay there. To me, that is the injustice. And so when we sign the MOA, just let them stay there. Like, just get it over with, So whether we're accessed or not, the urgency of signing it, to me, is a vote of confidence to our community. It's showing our community, like, we're putting on all our flyers, we're putting on everywhere that, we're trying to retain teachers of color. So then what's the holdup? Like, if it's so urgency, I don't care if everybody was safe. If it's so urgent, what's the holdup is my question. So yeah, that's how I feel about that.
Yeah. Well, we're getting close to time, and I want to make sure we leave enough time for community questions. So audience, please send in your questions. We'd love to hear from you. But I got one more question for you. And, I am very, very interested in what's going to happen in the next couple months in terms of moving towards a strike. And so I'm just curious to hear from you. I respect you so much. I value your thoughts and opinions. So do, the hundreds of people in this call right now. So what are your thoughts about this strike? What should parents know about the strike? What should community know about the strike? And what do you think about the strike?
I think the strike is a difficult conversation because of us distance learning, because of e-learning, right? Because of quarantining, all the hardship that parents and educators have gone through during this pandemic. Parents have their right, they got the right to advocate and look out for their babies. And the educators are the professionals who deserve to get paid, especially the ESPs. They are a lot of times our SEAs, our paraprofessionals who are majority Black. They are not on a teacher contract, but they also have they also are fighting for similar things, especially for a livable wage, a fair wage for the ESPs. And so a lot of the strike talk is around making sure that the ESPs, as they rightly deserve to be paid a living wage, because they are like our unsung heroes. Like they're holding it all together. And when we went to e-learning those 2 weeks, my principal, Yusuf Abdullah, sent out an email saying, I'm concerned because when they allowed us to go home, it was majority licensed white teachers, but the support staff are majority Black. So they're the ones that had to come to school still and be in person and figure that, you know what I'm saying? And so we are fighting for our ESPs to have a living wage, but so are teachers. And the thing is that, you know, I was just saying this on another call that like, I am not an anomaly. I know people like to give me all this beautiful affirmation, and I do receive all of it so much, but I know so many brilliant teachers, educators who do what I do, who I learned from, you know, and we all deserve, you know, to be paid for the work that we're doing as professionals. We deserve, so like, smaller case sizes for special education, the things that we're fighting for, they deserve that as well. But my thought would be, as a community member, why are so many kids in special ed in the first place? That could be both and too. You know what I'm saying? And so we're trying to get 100% of educators to vote yes, so that we can put pressure on the school district to concede to our demands so that we don't have to go on strike. I would also say, like, parents, community folks, like, a strike is not something that we want, is not something that I want. It puts me in a position, right? It puts me in a very difficult position because I'm for a community, but I'm also for, you know, earning a livable wage. I'm also for fair pay, right? At the same time. So we need a win. We need a win, and we need not to go on strike in order to get that win. So the more we can put pressure on the district to, you know, negotiate, you know, before a strike happens, that would be, you know, ideal.
Right. So I guess the question that I've been asking, you know, we do our regular video updates of school board meetings and things going on in MPS. The question, I've been asking a couple of questions, to be fair. So, but what's different today than what was going on a year ago, right? Like, a year ago, we were in distance learning. A year ago, we were, you know, ESPs were severely underpaid. Nothing has changed from that. You know, the only thing that's changed is time has passed. But I guess my question, maybe the better question, is why now, as opposed, like, why is the strike imminent now as opposed to any time before? Because it feels like, you know, the relationship between the district and the union has, I mean, I guess decayed. I don't know, maybe, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that too. Like, where is the relationship between the district and the union? Is there a world where they can come together and, you know, come to an agreement around protecting teachers of color, come to an agreement around better pay for ESPs, come to an agreement around, like, I have challenged that. I think the relationship is too rotten to get to that place at this point. What would your perspective be as someone who's taken on leadership roles in the union, as a member of your union? Like, where would you say that relationship exists today?
I think a really good question would be, like, how did we get here?
How did we get here?
How did we get here? You know, and the bargaining table is where our power is at. Our contract is really where our power is at. Our collective bargaining, that's what it's called, collective bargaining. That's where our power is at. But if our district is used to us not having that kind of power, not having those kind of relationships where we have each other's backs, then it's easy for a larger institution then to, right, invest in their own self-interest. And so I think when you don't have that collective power, you can't push for change. And now now that we have this collective struggle, right? If we have excluded voices, if we have silenced voices in our union, right now, everyone is feeling overworked, overwhelmed, overburdened. Before, I was reading an NPR article around the public education crisis, how like over 500,000 teachers have quit since the beginning of the pandemic. But the things they were listing, like feeling overwhelmed, feeling overworked, feeling unsupported, feeling left out of decision making, all those things, I was thinking like, dang, I felt that before this pandemic. You know what I'm saying? We felt that before distance learning. That's not anything new. When I say we, I mean teachers of color, right? We have been felt unsafe. We have been felt overworked. We have been felt silenced and excluded, right, and distant. You know what I'm saying? So we have felt all those things before. So now, but when you add COVID on top of that and distance learning, we now have a shared collective struggle that I think white institutions, especially our union in the district, have to recognize. So now
can you say that one more time? I really want to make sure people do not miss that point, because that's a really important point that I think you should drive home again.
Okay, I shall try. I get up on my little, get the teaching and the preaching.
I mean, you were saying what you were saying, and so let me try to identify the point that I think you should reiterate. Is like, now that there's this collective struggle around COVID, as opposed to like before, there were pockets of teachers that were struggling with isolation, with being overworked, with all this kind of stuff. But now that there's a collective struggle, now we're ready to strike. So, and I just wanted to hear
absolutely
go deeper on that point.
And I often hear like, the George Floyd uprisings and things like that as well. And so some folks are feeling their agency around, protesting in the street, but, they can also feel good as they're fighting for educational justice, while at the same time investing in their own interests. So pay, smaller class sizes, what else are we fighting for? Lower caseloads, more mental health supports, like all those things that we always ask for those. Those aren't anything new, right? But what is new is COVID. And what is new is folks walking away in astronomical numbers from teaching, right? Oh, but we need teachers, right? We need you to stay. So now let's talk about how these things that we're fighting for also help you to stay too, right? But it also is a win for the folks who have been here too. So there's definitely entrance convergence. And so it creates, you know what it do? It creates a catch-22 situation. Because it's like, always, right? The union is an institution used to protect workers, right? Collectivized bargaining protects workers. But when you have not felt protected by your union, when you have not felt supported by your union, right? When you have tried to engage in your union and have felt silenced and disenfranchised and bullied, right? Then you say, I'll pay my dues because I still want the protection, but I'm not going to engage and participate. But now, since we all want safer work environments physically, that is a tangible fight that we can all fight collectively. And
just going off of that, what I also have heard you say, I mean, not directly, but let me make my own statement from what I'm just like learning from you is, I'm going to pay my dues to get that protection, but I'm going to be excluded and I'm going to take a step back. And so the people that are excluded, the people that are bullied, the people that are pushed down and pushed out are paying the same rate, but getting lesser protections, essentially, right? Like we're talking about teachers of color not getting the protections that they need for their jobs, right? We're talking about people who want to make their voices heard in this democratic institution, and they're just not, that's just not being received well, and their, you know, their interests aren't always being represented. So that is tough. That is definitely tough.
It is tough, but you know, it's not even for educators of color. You know, white educators, the union is supposed to protect the profession, but also, you know, address working conditions.
Mhm.
If the union is not set up to address all the working conditions, right, all the things that make us feel unsafe, and you wait, then when you have something obvious, it's a lot harder to build power around those things versus doing it the other way around and making sure that all members feel like our union is a place to engage, a place for parents to understand what is it you, how does this even, how can I get in, you know what I'm saying? Community organizations, how can, so it is a collective power. It's a three-pronged approach where we're just building all this power in the city, and we have built trust among each others to say that we got each other's back no matter what. And this is the moment where we got to have each other's back, but we should have been had that. Okay.
Right. Yeah. So we're running low on time, so I do want to open it up to community questions. So I'll let people take a moment, ask your question, or submit a question. But while you're doing that, I wanted to just really quickly highlight, like I said before, we are working to try to figure out how do we ensure that teachers of color get the protections that they so desperately need. Otherwise, we're going to lose them due to accessing and layoffs potentially this year. So
can I do something real quick? You know, I can't help it.
Okay.
There is a comment in the chat that says unions get a bad rap, internalized anti-labor feelings. This is a really good example of gaslighting. So this is what happens. This is a really good example of what happens. So I can't be honest about the racism. I can't, although I'm on here talking about the importance of the institution, I can't talk about the things that need to change or be improved or get better, and without it turning into a reversal of us being anti-union, anti-teachers. Right? When I am a teacher, when I'm a union paid member, I pay my $100 and some every month, right? I try to engage, and yet I'm supposed to at the same time deny. Can you imagine if Black folks right now, right? We're losing our voting laws. Can you imagine if Black folks right now, or people of color right now, because we didn't want to attack the democracy, we don't point out the issues within the democracy in order to make it better. We then would just concede, right? And allow other people then to make decisions on our behalf. I just think it's another good example of shaming. I think it's another good example of gaslighting. Instead of saying, I recognize your reality, Nafeesah, as a Black educator. Everything that you just said is real and legit. How can we work to make sure that labor doesn't get a bad rap? What can we do then to make it better? But instead, it becomes a shame, which is a tool of the oppressor, to then silence me to say my experiences and educators of color experiences are illegitimate. No, it most definitely can be a both and I'm not going to be trapped into this catch-22 that says I can't point out the issues within the institution that I paid towards that is supposed to represent me and my fellow colleagues. Okay.
I hear you. But yeah, that's so real. That is so real. So again, really quickly, I know there are questions. I just want to make sure I highlight this before my team says I didn't do what I was supposed to do. We want to make sure we let people know about these upcoming trainings to learn more about the teacher contract and how teachers of color are, not getting the protections that they need properly. So we have 4 dates coming up: February 5th, February 10th, February 12th, February 15th. Lots of opportunities to learn more about this contract and how we, like Nafeesah asked earlier, how did we end up here with teachers of color? Why are we at this point where we have only 1 month to come to an agreement? And do we think MPS and MFT can come to an agreement? So check out that training. I just put the link in the chat so that you all have access to the 4 different opportunities, and you can sign up for the time that works best for you. With the 5 minutes that we have left, first of all, people are going off in the comments. A lot of appreciation, a lot of love for what you just shared. So want to affirm that. But in the comments, wanted to ask this first question: how can Black and other educators of color work together in the benefit of students and empowering community?
We get involved, I'm not gonna let nobody push me out, but I recognize that it's hard to be the only one or be the only few. So what I just did is a really good example of that. Speak truth to power. Don't do it by yourself if you feel uncomfortable, but you most definitely, organize. If that we don't have to wait for other folks to be the source of our liberation. We are the source of our liberation. And even if we're small in numbers, as far as culturally, there are other white folks who are hoping that we speak up, so then they feel comfortable to speak up too, because they get silenced and bullied as well. So I think us not lying, us telling the truth, that it's a both and. We love teaching our babies and being in the education system, but it's hard. It's hard to stick around. And if we support each other, if we show up for each other and legitimize, even if they won't really legitimize our reality and affirm our reality, we can do that for ourselves. Don't let nobody deny your truth and your reality and how you're experiencing your job. If you're the only one, I'm sorry. If you need me to show up, listen, I will. Because, I think the more we tell the truth, the more they have to feel uncomfortable with the reality that they are imposing upon us.
Yeah. Great. I'm going to just rapid fire some of these. All right. So let me know. What is standing in the way of the MOA or the Memorandum of Agreement on teachers of color from your perspective? Does this district seem to support it?
The district seems to support it. I think it's contract language. It's around, so we have seniority, which means first in, last out, which means they go by the order in which you were hired at that school. So the MOA is trying to protect those teachers of color who might be out of seniority area, and they're going back and forth around how many exemptions and what those exemptions look like in the MOA as a way to, our union calls it an unintended consequence, right? Create imbalance maybe in another area of our district rather than the most vulnerable places as well. So it's behind closed doors. I can't tell you because I can't be there, neither can you. But that is my understanding, is that it's around the number or the type of exemptions that would say, because you can't say teachers of color because that would create discrimination legally. So right. They have to go around those things and find out where most teachers of color are concentrated and try to figure out how to protect them there. And that is what they're going back and forth on, is how many and which ones should be in this MOA, according to what I'm getting, the information that I'm getting.
Got it. Cool. I know you might have just answered this question and this person kind of said that, but since you just did it so eloquently and beautifully, I thought I'd ask it again. So someone said, a friend posted a statement below on Facebook. It is so sad to see other BIPOC folk backing measures to decimate teachers' unions and public schooling. What is your take on that point of view, Nafeesah?
We don't have to tear down a system that we're let in, right? When we're let in, when we're denied equal access, when we're denied equal protection under the law, when we get when there's no representation without taxation, when we get those things that we deserve, it's only being union busted when you refuse to not operate in a way that exclude people. You can't blame the institution. You can't blame the people for coming at an institution, especially since it's democratic and people vote, right? So if we are not represented, if our grievances, if our issues are not represented, and we're saying that, that's not union busting. That's not anti-union. That is saying you need to include us too. Yeah. You need to stop lying to us. You need to support us. You know what I'm saying? So it's not that. I think when unions change the way they operate, they don't have to worry about anyone trying to come and regulate. You know what I'm saying? They ain't got to worry about it because they can stand on what they preach.
Okay. Well, I think we'll leave it at that. Do you have any closing thoughts for us, Nafeesah?
Yes, I mean, I guess I can be honest about it too. I am running for union president of our MFT because for the same, everything that I'm talking about, right, is I just want it to be better for all of us, right? Not just some of us. And what I'm worried about is after the strike and what happens, just like, integration. Once white folks, had their entrance converged with ours, they got what they wanted, whether it's a moral sensibility, whether it's money, whatever it is, they forget about us. And what I'm saying is that if we're going to be in this fight together, you ain't going to forget about us, right? You ain't going to get a raise and then kick us out at the same time. Okay, so I'm running for union president. I am still, organizing around that and trying to find educators who just want to be a better union where you feel safe, seen, and supported. And it's better for all of us, not just some of us, and not when you just need us. Okay, so that would be my last thought. I appreciate this opportunity. I'm so grateful for the people that have joined us. I think the union is one institution that we don't focus on. And so it can be a union, an institution that we miss out on, and their impact and the power that they have in education. And so I appreciate the folks who are willing to come and just learn and ask your questions and, be informed about how much impact unions really have.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Nafeesah. We really appreciate it, from learning from you and just hearing your perspective around everything going on in MPS. And so with that, I will say good night, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. And don't forget to sign up for these awesome opportunities to learn more about the contract. The link is again in the chat for you all to use, and we'll send it out as well. But thank you all for listening, and I hope you have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye.